Why you keep going back to what is destroying you. 13 ways to break the cycle. Have you ever looked at your own life and asked a question that almost feels impossible to answer? Why do you keep returning to the very thing you know is hurting you? Maybe it's a relationship that leaves you emotionally exhausted, yet you find yourself sending one more message. Maybe it's alcohol, pornography, gambling, social media, junk food, procrastination, or that relentless voice in your head that convinces you you'll never be enough. Every time you promise yourself it will be the last time, you genuinely mean it. You wake up determined to change. You feel motivated. You tell yourself this time is different. And yet, days or sometimes only hours later, you're back where you started, wondering how you ended up here again. If you've ever experienced that frustration, you're far from alone. In fact, one of the greatest misconceptions about human behavior is that people continue destructive habits because they lack intelligence, discipline, or willpower. Modern psychology tells a very different story. The truth is far more unsettling and far more hopeful. What if the problem isn't that you're weak? What if your brain is simply doing exactly what it was designed to do? Before we go any further, I want you to know something important. This documentary isn't about judging you. It's not about making you feel guilty for the choices you've made. It's about understanding why your mind works the way it does and, more importantly, how you can begin to change it. Because by the end of this documentary, you won't just understand why you keep going back to what is destroying you. You'll have 13 psychology-based ways to begin breaking that cycle. If understanding yourself and mastering your mind is something you're serious about, consider subscribing to The Human Code. Every week, we explore the hidden psychology behind human behavior and turn complex science into practical tools for a better life. Now, let's uncover the truth that most people never hear. Imagine you're standing thousands of years in the past. There are no supermarkets, no smartphones, no hospitals, no police, and no comfortable homes. Every single day is uncertain. Food is scarce. Predators are real. A single wrong decision could mean the difference between survival and death. In that world, your ancestors didn't survive because they were the happiest people. They survived because their brains became extraordinarily good at keeping them alive. That's a crucial distinction. Your brain did not evolve to make you happy. It evolved to make sure you survived long enough to pass on your genes. This changes everything. Because if survival is the brain's highest priority, then happiness becomes secondary. Comfort becomes secondary. Fulfillment becomes secondary. Your brain constantly asks one question: what has kept us alive before? And whatever the answer is, it tries to repeat it. This ancient survival system still exists inside every one of us. The problem is that while the world around us has transformed dramatically, our brains haven't evolved nearly as quickly. The same system that once helped our ancestors avoid danger now tries to protect us from uncertainty, even when uncertainty might actually lead to a better life. Think about that fact for a moment. Why do people stay in jobs they hate? Why do they remain in relationships that drain them? Why do they continue habits they know are damaging their health? Often, it's because the familiar feels safer than the unknown. And that's where our story truly begins. Most people believe they move toward pleasure and away from pain. It's a simple idea, and on the surface it makes sense. But real life tells a more complicated story. People return to abusive relationships. They repeatedly sabotage opportunities they've worked hard to create. They stay trapped in cycles of anxiety, avoidance, addiction, and self-doubt, even when those patterns cause enormous suffering. If humans only chased pleasure, none of this should happen. So why does it? Because your brain doesn't simply seek pleasure. It seeks predictability. Predictability reduces uncertainty. And uncertainty, to a survival-focused brain, often feels dangerous. This is one of the most important ideas you'll hear today. The brain would often rather experience familiar pain than unfamiliar freedom. That's a difficult sentence to accept. But once you understand it, countless behaviors suddenly begin to make sense. Imagine someone who has spent years hearing criticism. Eventually, criticism becomes normal. Imagine someone raised in constant emotional chaos. Peace can actually feel uncomfortable because it's unfamiliar. Or, imagine someone who has relied on alcohol after every stressful day for years. The alcohol isn't solving the stress, but the brain has learned a predictable pattern. Stress arrives, alcohol follows, temporary relief appears. That sequence becomes familiar, and familiarity begins to feel safe. Notice something remarkable. The brain isn't asking whether the pattern is healthy. It's asking whether the pattern is known. That difference explains why so many people struggle to change even when they desperately want to. Maybe you've experienced this yourself. You start eating healthier, exercising regularly, or building a better routine. Everything feels exciting for a week or two. Then, almost without thinking, you slip back into old behaviors. Afterwards, you blame yourself. You say you lack discipline. You tell yourself you're lazy. But what if that's the wrong explanation? What if your brain simply recognized an old path and followed it because that path required the least effort? This isn't an excuse. It's an explanation. And explanations are powerful because they point us toward solutions instead of shame. Here's something fascinating. Your brain consumes an enormous amount of energy despite making up only a small percentage of your body weight. To conserve that energy, it automates repeated behaviors. The more often you repeat something, the less conscious effort it requires. This process is incredibly efficient. It's why you can tie your shoes, drive familiar roads, or brush your teeth without thinking through every movement. Habits free your conscious mind to focus on new challenges. But the brain doesn't distinguish between good habits and bad ones. It automates both. Every repeated action strengthens the neural pathway associated with it. Over time, what once required conscious effort becomes automatic. That's why destructive behaviors can eventually feel almost involuntary. You're no longer making each decision from scratch. You're following a pathway your brain has strengthened through repetition. This is where many people make a devastating mistake. They wage war against the behavior while ignoring the system that keeps producing it. It's like trimming weeds while leaving the roots untouched. For a little while, everything looks different. Then the weeds grow back. Real transformation begins beneath the surface. And beneath every repeated behavior lies something far more powerful than motivation. It lies in the way your brain has learned to survive. In the next part, we're going to uncover one of the most overlooked truths in psychology: why your brain can mistake familiarity for safety, how your past quietly shapes your present, and why understanding this hidden mechanism is the first real step toward breaking any destructive cycle for good. Why you keep going back to what is destroying you. 13 ways to break the cycle. If your brain prefers what is familiar over what is healthy, then an uncomfortable question naturally follows. Where did those familiar patterns come from in the first place? The answer often lies much earlier than most people realize. Long before you developed your current habits, before you entered your first serious relationship, before you faced adult responsibilities, your brain was quietly learning one of the most important lessons of your life. This is what normal looks like. Every experience, every relationship, every repeated emotion became part of an internal blueprint that still influences your decisions today. When we hear the word home, we usually think of comfort, warmth, and safety. But psychologically, home has a different meaning. Home is simply what your brain recognizes as familiar. It doesn't have to be peaceful. It doesn't have to be loving. It doesn't even have to make you happy. It only has to be predictable. Imagine two children growing up in completely different environments. One wakes up each morning knowing they are loved. Mistakes are met with patience. Arguments end with forgiveness. Home feels emotionally safe. The other child grows up surrounded by criticism, unpredictability, or emotional neglect. They never know whether today will be calm or chaotic. Affection comes and goes without warning. They spend much of their childhood walking on eggshells. Years later, these two people may respond to life in remarkably different ways. The first person may naturally seek healthy relationships because stability feels familiar. The second may find themselves strangely uncomfortable when life becomes peaceful. A relationship built on trust can feel boring. A calm home can feel unfamiliar. Instead, they may be drawn toward emotionally unavailable partners, constant conflict, or dramatic highs and lows, not because they enjoy suffering, but because their brain recognizes those patterns as normal. This isn't destiny, it isn't weakness, and it certainly isn't proof that someone wants to suffer. It's simply evidence that the brain tends to trust what it already knows. Psychologists have long observed this tendency. Human beings often return to familiar emotional environments, even painful ones, because the brain interprets predictability as a form of safety. It's one reason why breaking destructive cycles can feel so incredibly difficult. You're not just changing a habit. You're challenging your brain's definition of what feels normal. This is also why shame is such a poor teacher. When people fail, they often attack themselves. What's wrong with me? Why can't I just stop? Everyone else seems able to control themselves, but shame rarely produces lasting change. In fact, it often strengthens the very cycle you're trying to escape. When you feel ashamed, your stress increases. Your emotional discomfort grows. And if you've trained your brain to escape discomfort through a destructive habit, shame becomes another trigger that sends you right back to the behavior you're trying to leave behind. It's a cruel loop. You engage in the habit, you feel guilty. The guilt creates emotional pain. The emotional pain triggers the habit again. The cycle continues. That's why understanding is far more powerful than self-condemnation. Understanding doesn't remove responsibility. It removes unnecessary blame. It allows you to see your behavior not as evidence that you're broken, but as evidence that your brain has learned a strategy, even if that strategy no longer serves you. Think about driving along a familiar route. Have you ever arrived at your destination and realized you barely remember the journey? Your conscious mind wasn't directing every movement. Your brain was relying on well-established neural pathways. Habits work in exactly the same way. Repetition gradually transfers behaviors from deliberate choices into automatic routines. This is one of the brain's greatest strengths. It saves energy. But it also means repeated mistakes become increasingly effortless. Every time you respond to stress in the same way, the neural pathway grows stronger. Every repetition tells the brain, this works. Remember this. Eventually, the behavior begins to feel almost automatic. This is why people often describe destructive habits with phrases like, I wasn't even thinking. It just happened. I don't know why I did it. They're not making excuses. They're describing what automatic behavior actually feels like. Fortunately, the same brain that learned these patterns also possesses one of the most remarkable abilities in human biology, neuroplasticity. For decades, scientists believed the adult brain was relatively fixed. Today, we know something very different. The brain is constantly reorganizing itself. Every new skill you learn, every healthy habit you repeat, every perspective you practice creates new neural connections while allowing older pathways to weaken over time. That's extraordinary. It means your past may explain your patterns, but it doesn't have to imprison your future. Imagine walking through a dense forest. The very first time, there's no clear path. You push through branches, step over fallen trees, and struggle to find your way. But if you walk the same route every day, a trail gradually appears. The ground becomes easier to cross. The journey requires less effort. Your brain builds habits exactly like that. Old behaviors become well-worn highways. New behaviors begin as narrow, overgrown trails. This is why change feels so exhausting in the beginning. People often believe the discomfort means they're failing. In reality, it usually means they're building a new path. Every healthy decision is another step through the forest. Every repetition clears the trail a little more. Eventually, the path that once felt impossible becomes the easier route. But before that happens, you'll encounter one of the most powerful forces inside the human brain. A chemical so misunderstood that millions of people blame it for their struggles without ever understanding what it actually does. People call it the pleasure chemical, but that's only part of the story. To truly understand why you keep going back to what is destroying you, we need to understand the real role of dopamine and why your brain often becomes addicted to the chase long before it becomes attached to the reward. Why you keep going back to what is destroying you. 13 ways to break the cycle. For years, dopamine has been blamed for almost everything: social media addiction, gambling, pornography, junk food, online shopping, video games, even procrastination. Scroll through enough articles or watch enough videos, and you'll probably hear the same phrase repeated over and over again. Dopamine is the pleasure chemical. It's simple. It's memorable. It's also incomplete. The truth is far more fascinating. Dopamine isn't primarily the chemical of pleasure. It's the chemical of pursuit. It doesn't simply reward you for getting something. It motivates you to go looking for it. That's an important difference because it changes the way we understand almost every destructive habit. Imagine you're walking through a forest thousands of years ago. You spot what looks like a berry bush in the distance. Before you've even reached it, your brain begins releasing dopamine. Not because you've eaten the berries, but because there's a possibility they might be there. That anticipation sharpens your attention. It increases your motivation. It encourages you to keep moving. Without this system, our ancestors would have lacked the drive to search for food, explore new territory, or solve problems. Dopamine wasn't designed to make us feel good. It was designed to keep us moving toward what might help us survive. That same ancient system is still operating inside your brain today. The only difference is that modern life has become incredibly good at hijacking it. Every notification on your phone, every like, every new message, every autoplay video, every online sale, every swipe, every spin of a slot machine, every unopened email, every endless scroll. Each one offers the possibility of a reward, and your brain loves possibilities. Notice something interesting about social media. You don't receive something exciting every time you refresh your feed. Sometimes there's nothing new at all. Other times you find an interesting video, a funny comment, or a message you've been hoping to receive. That unpredictability is incredibly powerful. When rewards arrive at uncertain times instead of predictable ones, the brain often becomes even more motivated to keep checking. It's why people unlock their phones hundreds of times a day without consciously deciding to. It's why gamblers often describe the biggest rush occurring before they know whether they've won or lost. It's why many addictions become strongest during anticipation rather than after the reward itself. The chase can become more addictive than the destination. But dopamine alone still doesn't explain everything. Because if dopamine were the whole story, then everyone exposed to smartphones, alcohol, pornography, or gambling would become equally addicted. Clearly, that's not what happens. Which tells us something important. Dopamine may fuel motivation, but something else decides what we're motivated to pursue. To understand that, we have to look beneath the habit itself. Think about the last time you felt emotionally overwhelmed. Maybe someone rejected you. Maybe work left you exhausted. Maybe anxiety wouldn't stop racing through your mind. Maybe loneliness settled in after everyone else had gone to sleep. In those moments, were you truly searching for pleasure, or were you searching for relief? There's a profound difference. Most destructive habits don't begin because people desperately want pleasure. They begin because people desperately want the pain to stop. The first drink doesn't solve the problem. The first cigarette doesn't fix loneliness. The first binge doesn't erase heartbreak. The first hour of scrolling doesn't remove anxiety. The first bet doesn't repair financial stress. The first text to a toxic ex doesn't heal the relationship. Yet each one offers something incredibly seductive: temporary escape. And to a brain overwhelmed by emotional discomfort, temporary relief can feel like survival. Your brain notices that relief. It stores the memory. Then it quietly writes a new instruction into its operating system. Next time we feel like this, do that again. That's how habits are born. Not from weakness, from learning. Over time, the original problem almost disappears. Eventually, you don't need a major crisis. A certain place can trigger it, a particular smell, a stressful email, a Friday evening, driving past a familiar street, even the sound of your phone vibrating. Psychologists describe this as the habit loop, a cue, a routine, a reward. The cue triggers the craving. The craving drives the behavior. The behavior produces relief, or at least the expectation of relief. The brain records the sequence, then waits for the next cue. Repeat that process often enough, and eventually the conscious mind barely participates. That's why people often say, "I don't even know why I did it." They're usually telling the truth. Their brain recognized the cue before their conscious mind fully realized what was happening. But here's where the story becomes even more revealing. What if the strongest addiction in your life isn't alcohol, or social media, or gambling, or pornography? What if it's certainty? Human beings crave certainty because certainty feels predictable. Predictability feels safe, even when it hurts. That's why some people repeatedly return to relationships they know are unhealthy. Why others sabotage career opportunities just as success begins to arrive. Why someone who has lived with anxiety for years may unconsciously fear peace because peace feels unfamiliar. The brain often chooses a familiar prison over an unfamiliar freedom. Not because the prison is enjoyable, because it's known. And known has always felt safer than unknown. But there is one force inside your mind even more powerful than dopamine, habits, or familiarity. It quietly shapes every decision you make. It determines what you believe you deserve. It influences what opportunities you'll pursue. It decides whether change feels possible or impossible. That force isn't your personality. It isn't your past. It's your identity. And until you change the story your brain believes about who you are, your old habits will keep trying to pull you back toward the person you've always been. Because the strongest force in human psychology isn't what you do. It's who you believe you are. And that's where the real transformation begins. In the next part, we'll uncover the hidden psychology of identity and begin the first of the 13 ways to break the cycle, the practical, science-backed principles that can help you retrain your brain and reclaim control of your life. Why you keep going back to what is destroying you. 13 ways to break the cycle. If you've made it this far, you've already uncovered something many people never do. Your destructive habits are not random. They aren't proof that you're lazy, weak, or beyond help. They're patterns your brain has learned over time. But understanding the problem is only half the journey. Imagine standing inside a prison and finally discovering why the walls were built. That's valuable knowledge, but it doesn't open the door. To walk out, you need a new strategy. This is where everything begins to change. The next 13 principles are not quick fixes or motivational slogans. They are grounded in well-established psychological ideas and practical behavioral science. None of them will transform your life overnight. But practiced consistently, they can gradually retrain your brain and help you build a future that no longer depends on repeating your past. The first way to break the cycle: stop fighting yourself, start understanding yourself. Most people believe self-criticism creates discipline. It doesn't. Think about what happens after someone slips back into an old habit. I can't believe I did it again. I'm hopeless. I'll never change. Those thoughts may feel honest, but psychologically they often make the situation worse. Research on self-compassion and behavior change consistently shows that people who respond to setbacks with understanding rather than harsh self-condemnation are more likely to recover and continue making progress. That's because shame narrows our thinking. It makes us want to hide, avoid, or escape. And if escaping is exactly what your destructive habit provides, shame becomes fuel for the very cycle you're trying to break. Understanding is different. Understanding asks, what happened? What triggered this? What can I learn? That's the mindset of someone solving a problem instead of attacking themselves. The goal isn't to remove responsibility. It's to replace punishment with curiosity, because curiosity leads to change. Shame rarely does. The second way to break the cycle: identify your triggers before they control you. Every destructive habit begins somewhere, not with the action, with a trigger. Many people think their habit is the problem. Often, the trigger is. A trigger can be an emotion, stress, loneliness, boredom, anxiety. It can also be a place, a routine, a particular group of people, even a specific time of day. Imagine someone who always eats unhealthy food late at night. The real trigger may not be hunger at all. It may be exhaustion after work, the silence of an empty house, or the habit of sitting in front of the television. Unless they recognize that pattern, they'll keep trying to fight the food instead of understanding what brings them there in the first place. For 1 week, try becoming an observer instead of a judge. Every time you feel the urge to return to a destructive behavior, pause. Ask yourself 4 questions. What happened just before this? What am I feeling right now? What am I trying to escape? What do I actually need? Those 4 questions can reveal patterns you've never noticed before. You cannot change a trigger you never see. But once you recognize it, you begin taking back control. The third way to break the cycle: change your environment before you try to change your willpower. One of the biggest myths in self-improvement is that successful people simply have stronger willpower. The evidence suggests something different. Environment often beats willpower. Imagine placing a bowl of chocolate on your desk while trying to eat healthier. Now imagine removing it completely. Which situation requires more self-control? The answer is obvious. Every unnecessary temptation drains mental energy. The same principle applies to your phone, to alcohol in the house, to gambling, apps, to toxic conversations, to websites, to routines. Your environment constantly nudges your behavior, often without your awareness. Instead of asking, "How can I become stronger?" ask, "How can I make the right choice easier?" Sometimes the smartest decision isn't resisting temptation. It's removing unnecessary temptation altogether. That's not weakness, that's wisdom. The fourth way to break the cycle: replace the habit, don't just remove it. This is where many people fail. They focus entirely on stopping, but the brain dislikes empty spaces. If a habit once relieved stress, removed boredom, or created excitement, simply deleting it leaves the underlying need unanswered. Nature dislikes a vacuum, so does your brain. If you stop scrolling every evening but never replace it with something meaningful, boredom quickly returns. If you quit emotional eating without learning healthier ways to regulate stress, your brain will eventually search for another escape. The question isn't only, "What am I giving up?" It's, "What am I building instead?" Replace endless scrolling with reading, walking, or calling someone you care about. Replace alcohol with exercise, journaling, or meaningful conversation. Replace isolation with community. The replacement doesn't have to be perfect. It simply needs to move you toward the person you're becoming, rather than the person you're trying to leave behind. These first 4 principles lay the foundation. They help you understand your mind instead of fighting it. But lasting change requires something even deeper. Because sooner or later, every person trying to change encounters the same powerful force, an urge, a craving. A moment where every part of the brain whispers, "Just one more time." Most people believe those moments determine whether they're strong or weak. Psychology tells a different story. The people who successfully break destructive cycles don't necessarily experience fewer urges. They've simply learned how to respond to them differently. And that's exactly where we're going next. In the next part, we'll explore ways 5 through 9, including how to ride out cravings without giving in, why your identity matters more than motivation, and why the smallest victories often become the beginning of the biggest transformations. Every meaningful change eventually comes down to a moment that almost no one else will ever see. Not a dramatic breakthrough, not an inspiring speech, not a life-changing book. Just a quiet moment. A craving appears. An old thought enters your mind. Your hand reaches for the phone. You think about sending the message. You drive past the liquor store. You open the app almost without thinking. This is the moment where most people believe they're either strong enough or weak enough. But neuroscience suggests something much more encouraging. Urges are not commands. They are temporary brain states. And temporary brain states always pass. The fifth way to break the cycle: learn to ride the urge instead of obeying it. One of the biggest mistakes people make is trying to fight every craving with brute force. They tense up. They argue with themselves. They try not to think about it. Ironically, this often makes the craving stronger. Think about what happens if someone tells you, whatever you do, don't think about a pink elephant. What immediately appears in your mind? The pink elephant. The brain doesn't respond well to suppression. Instead, psychologists often encourage a different approach, sometimes called urge surfing. Imagine a wave rising in the ocean. At first, it grows stronger. It reaches its peak. Then, inevitably, it falls. Urges behave in much the same way. Most people believe cravings continue getting stronger forever unless they satisfy them. That's rarely what happens. Most urges rise, peak, and gradually weaken if we don't immediately act on them. The next time a craving appears, don't panic. Notice it. Name it. I'm experiencing an urge, not I have to do this. There's a huge psychological difference. You're observing the feeling instead of becoming the feeling. Take a slow breath. Wait 5 minutes, then another 5. You may be surprised by how much weaker the urge becomes. You're teaching your brain one of the most powerful lessons it can ever learn. We don't have to obey every impulse. That lesson builds freedom. The sixth way to break the cycle: change your identity before you change your life. Most people focus on outcomes. I want to lose weight. I want to stop drinking. I want to quit smoking. I want to stop procrastinating. Those are good goals, but goals don't create lasting change. Identity does. Imagine two people refusing a cigarette. The first says, "No thanks. I'm trying to quit." The second says, "No thanks. I don't smoke." The behavior looks identical. The psychology is completely different. The first person is resisting who they believe they are. The second person is expressing who they believe they have become. Your brain constantly asks, what would someone like me do? If you still see yourself as an anxious person, you'll unconsciously protect that identity. If you believe you're lazy, you'll notice evidence that confirms it. If you believe you're someone who always fails, your brain will quietly search for ways to prove itself right. Identity becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. This doesn't mean pretending. It means choosing a new identity and allowing your actions to support it. Instead of saying, "I'm trying to become disciplined," ask, what would a disciplined person do today? Then do only that. One decision, one action, one vote for your future identity. James Clear describes this beautifully in Atomic Habits. Every action is a vote for the type of person you wish to become. Your identity isn't built by one dramatic moment. It's built through repeated evidence. The seventh way to break the cycle: heal the emotion beneath the habit. Many people spend years fighting behaviors without ever asking why those behaviors became necessary. Every habit serves a purpose, even destructive ones. Some numb loneliness. Some reduce anxiety. Some create excitement. Some distract from grief. Some temporarily silence self-doubt. If you remove the behavior without understanding the emotion underneath it, the pain often finds another escape. This is why lasting change usually requires emotional honesty. Ask yourself, what feeling am I trying not to feel? That question can be uncomfortable, but it's also incredibly revealing. Because healing the emotion weakens the habit that depends on it. The eighth way to break the cycle: make peace with discomfort. Perhaps the biggest lie we've been taught is that growth should feel comfortable. It rarely does. Think about learning to ride a bicycle, learning a language, starting a business, building strength in the gym. Everything meaningful feels awkward before it feels natural. Changing your brain is no different. Remember what we discovered earlier. The brain prefers familiarity, which means healthy change often feels uncomfortable, not because it's wrong, but because it's new. Many people mistake that discomfort for failure. In reality, it's often evidence that change is happening. The goal isn't to eliminate discomfort. The goal is to stop being afraid of it. Because on the other side of temporary discomfort is lasting freedom. The 9th way to break the cycle: celebrate tiny wins. Human beings often underestimate small improvements because we're obsessed with dramatic transformation. We want complete change immediately, but that's not how the brain rewires itself. Every healthy decision strengthens a new neural pathway. Every time you pause before reacting, every time you choose a healthier response, every time you keep one promise to yourself, you're changing your brain. These moments may seem insignificant. They're anything but. Tiny victories accumulate. Confidence grows through evidence, not motivation. Every small success becomes proof. Maybe I really can change. And once your brain begins believing change is possible, something extraordinary happens. Hope replaces helplessness. Momentum replaces resistance. The person you once believed was impossible slowly begins to emerge, not through one massive leap, but through hundreds of ordinary decisions that nobody else ever sees. But there are still 4 principles left. And together, they may be the most important of all. Because change is never perfect. You will stumble. You will have difficult days. The question isn't whether setbacks will happen. The question is what you'll believe about yourself when they do. Because the people who break destructive cycles aren't the people who never fall. They're the people who learn how to stand up differently. And that's exactly where we're going next. In the final part, we'll explore the last 4 ways to break the cycle, discover why setbacks don't define your future, and reveal the single mindset that separates temporary change from lifelong transformation. Why you keep going back to what is destroying you. 13 ways to break the cycle. If you've stayed with me until this point, you've probably realized something that changes the entire conversation around personal growth. Breaking destructive cycles isn't about becoming a different person overnight. It's about making enough small decisions that your brain slowly begins believing you already are a different person. But before that transformation becomes permanent, every single person faces the same obstacle, a setback. Maybe you make progress for 3 days, maybe 3 weeks, maybe 3 months. Then one difficult day arrives. You fall back into an old habit. And suddenly a voice inside your head whispers, "See? Nothing has changed." That voice has ended more transformations than failure ever has. Because the greatest danger isn't the setback itself. It's the meaning you attach to it. The 10th way to break the cycle: don't fight alone. Build accountability. Human beings were never designed to overcome every challenge in isolation. For most of human history, survival depended on community. Today, many of our struggles happen behind closed doors. People hide their addictions, their anxiety, their shame, their fears. And isolation gives destructive habits room to grow. Accountability isn't about someone policing your behavior. It's about making change visible. Sometimes that's a trusted friend. Sometimes a therapist. Sometimes a support group. Sometimes a mentor. The goal isn't perfection. The goal is having someone who reminds you who you're trying to become when your old identity starts calling you back. Because borrowed belief can carry you until your own belief becomes strong enough. The 11th way to break the cycle: treat setbacks as data, not defeat. Imagine a scientist running an experiment. The result isn't what they expected. Do they conclude they're a failure? No, they ask, "What did this teach me?" That's exactly how lasting change works. A setback isn't proof that you're incapable of changing. It's information. What triggered it? Were you exhausted? Stressed? Lonely? Overconfident? Did you ignore the warning signs? Every setback contains valuable information if you're willing to study it instead of letting it define you. The people who successfully transform their lives don't avoid failure. They become students of it. Instead of saying, "I failed," they ask, What can I adjust next time? That single shift turns every mistake into part of the solution. The 12th way to break the cycle. Trust repetition more than motivation. Motivation is wonderful, but it's unreliable. Some mornings you'll wake up inspired. Other mornings you won't. If your future depends entirely on feeling motivated, your progress will rise and fall with your emotions. Habits are different. They don't ask how you feel. They ask what you do repeatedly. Think about brushing your teeth. Most days you don't feel deeply inspired to do it. You simply do it because repetition has made it part of your identity. That's how real transformation happens. Not through one extraordinary decision, through ordinary decisions repeated consistently. The brain doesn't change because of intensity. It changes because of consistency. Every healthy repetition strengthens the new pathway. Every healthy repetition tells your brain, this is who we are now. Eventually, what once required discipline begins requiring very little effort at all. The new path becomes the familiar path. And that is the moment your brain finally stops pulling you backward. The 13th way to break the cycle. Become the architect of your future self. Now we arrive at the final principle. Perhaps the most important one. Most people spend their lives reacting. Reacting to stress. Reacting to fear. Reacting to circumstances. Reacting to emotions. But the people who experience lasting transformation begin asking a different question. Not, what do I feel like doing? But who am I becoming? Every decision becomes a vote. Every conversation. Every workout. Every healthy meal. Every difficult choice. Every time you choose honesty over comfort. Every time you refuse to let an impulse make your decision. Every time you keep a promise to yourself. You're casting another vote for the person you want to become. Identity isn't discovered, it's built. One decision at a time. One ordinary day at a time. One repeated action at a time. And one day you'll look back and realize something remarkable. The thing that once controlled you no longer does. Not because temptation disappeared, not because life became easy, but because you became someone who responds differently. Let's return to the question we asked at the very beginning. Why do you keep going back to what is destroying you? The answer was never that you were weak. It was never that you lacked intelligence. It was never that you were beyond hope. You kept going back because your brain remembered the paths it had walked thousands of times before. It chose familiarity over uncertainty, predictability over possibility, survival over growth. But here's the beautiful truth about the human brain. The same brain that learned those patterns can learn new ones. The same mind that built the prison can build the key. Your past may explain your habits. It does not have to decide your future. Every time you pause before reacting, every time you choose awareness over autopilot, every time you replace an old pattern with a healthier one, you aren't just resisting a habit. You're rewiring your brain. You're rewriting your identity. You're changing the story you'll tell about your life. So the next time that familiar voice whispers, just one more time, remember this. You don't have to win the rest of your life today. You only have to win this moment, because this moment becomes the next, and the next becomes a day. The day becomes a week. The week becomes a life. The battle was never against the habit. The battle was always between the person your brain remembers and the person you're choosing to become. Thank you for watching The Human Code. If this documentary helped you see yourself differently, subscribe for more evidence-based explorations into the psychology of human behavior. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Which of the 13 ways resonated with you the most, and which one will you put into practice first? Because understanding your mind isn't the finish line. It's where real change begins.